Hey everybody, my name is Alexander Smith, and welcome to my third presentation on our third research project for CSC 309. The topic of my presentation is the online road trip, how online censorship threatens freedom and prosperity for us all. What my presentation is basically about is covering the subject of the internet, the physical nature of the internet, and how that applies to the issue of censorship. What I'm hoping to do throughout this presentation is kind of open your mind a little bit to the physical nature of the internet and how that should make us take far more seriously the subject of censorship and government control over internet access in other countries. So basically the topics we're going to cover today are complacency and freedom, the history of the internet, the physical internet, the physical nature of digital censorship, censorship and oppression, and then the true value of internet freedom. So for those living in the United States and other democratic nations, we have access to high-speed internet access on a regular basis. Most people at least have DSL, but many places have fiber optic networks, 5G networks, and cable networks, and numerous other ways for people to access the internet in a generalized way. You can go down to your local McDonald's, Starbucks, and get internet access that way, even if you don't have a paid internet access yourself. Basically, it's commonplace. The internet access is so common that we might be complacent in how important this technology is and how much we may be taking it for granted. With internet freedom, you can view any website you want to. You can go on your device in the United States. You can view pretty much any website of your desire. You can go and research any topic you want to, participate in discussions, say anything you want to, access social media websites, research, say bad things about your government. Whatever you want to. There are really very few restrictions compared to other countries. However, this attitude can often lead to some complacency. The expectation that internet access is the same everywhere, but that's simply not the case, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit throughout this presentation. So let's talk a little bit about the history of the internet, because this is going to take a little bit of this is going to be important when we talk about the physical nature of the internet later on. So some of my sources for this section are History.com, NBC News, Business Insider, and WhoIsHosting.com. So the internet started off basically as, well, actually before we talk about that, let's cover a little bit the importance of communications. So in the history of humanity, short as it may be, we've had numerous technological improvements and enhancements in the nature of how we communicate. We've had everything from the spoken word, which in and of itself is a technology, to the use of the telegraph, horses, people running long distances, and the telephone, different other ways that we have of being able to communicate on a large scale. But perhaps one of the most important, if not the most important, was the creation of the internet and internet access generally. So the internet started off as a United States government project, and it involved two different universities sending data back and forth between computers. The term for this project was the Advanced Research Projects Agency Network, or ARPANET. And it was very clunky back in the day. It involved two large supercomputers that sent like a word back and forth, barely even worked, but people were pretty excited about it because it was the first time that the computers have been used to send data in this way, using that type of internet protocol, basically. As it progressed over time, more and more improvements came to what the internet was and is and what it will be in the future. Probably the most important, or one of the most important improvements, or one of the most important enhancements to the internet was the creation of the World Wide Web by Tim Berners-Lee. Basically, the internet itself is not something that you just access and what you see on these websites is the internet. The internet is a giant collection of communications networks, massive data servers that house data, and then all these different websites with which you use to access the data. The World Wide Web is basically the appearance of that data. It is the digital interpretation of that underlying data. So when you go to websites like Google.com, Amazon.com, there's no such data center. There's no such device or server or website somewhere sitting out there that has the word Amazon.com on it. Basically, Amazon.com is a set of words put into your browser utilizing the technological enhancements and improvements of the World Wide Web that allow you to access underlying data. So you type in Amazon.com, it goes to an IP address, which allows you to access data in a data server itself. So basically, the internet itself is a giant collection of data servers, all of which house everything from video data, website data, communications data, and everything else. The World Wide Web is how we see that and how it is interpreted for us to actually look at and view and comfortably access. And then each of those data centers are connected together via various types of internet routes, such as fiber optic lines, but most importantly, the use of these undersea cables. Basically, over a period of time since the creation of the internet, people have installed and maintained large undersea wires and cables that allow data to move back and forth between all these data centers. These undersea cables are allow for data to be transmitted between continents, more specifically. So between the United States and Europe and Asia, South Africa, all over the entire world, these massive undersea cables allow for the transmission of data. So the internet overall is a collection of giant cables and wires connecting to data centers, which are then routed through ISPs, fiber optic networks, DSL lines, all that kind of stuff, to your to routers and other devices, and then to your actual handheld devices or computers. So it's very much a physical thing. We think of it as this cloud in the sky kind of a thing, but really it's largely a physical network. So let's talk about the physical internet in the context of a metaphor. So imagine that you are driving a car down your local road, and you are driving from your house to the local coffee shop. So your car is your internet-connected device, your phone, your smartwatch, your computer, or your laptop, what have you. That is the car in this metaphor. The roads themselves, the highways, the interstates, these are all the routes that your car takes, and you have to take with that device to access those data servers. So if the coffee shop is on the other side of town, you're going to use maybe a small road, which could be your 5G network, 4G network, or your fiber optic line. The highways are your undersea cables. And then when you finally reach your destination, the houses, the buildings, these are going to be the actual data centers that you're going to. What the buildings and the houses look like is what is basically the World Wide Web. That is the visual nature of the digital internet. So keep this thought in your mind as we move on, but I want you to remember this metaphor. It's very important when we talk about censorship itself. So what does that have to do with online censorship? What does the physical nature of the internet have to do with online censorship? Well, basically what that means is that anyone who accesses the internet anywhere in the entire world, they need, first and foremost, they need a physical device and the wireless or physical connection to actually access these data servers. So if you are in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and you have a cell phone, that may not be enough if there's no cell towers to pull and transmit data for you from your device. You need some way of accessing everything else. But let's say there is a tower in the middle of the desert. So now your phone communicates with that tower. Your tower communicates with an ISP. Your ISP communicates via the system of undersea cables and everything else that connects these data servers. And now your device is now digitally connected to that data server, which could be countries over thousands of miles away, but you are connected to that data server. That's how powerful, how fast the internet is in general. But even more than this, in addition to all these device needs and everything else, you also need digital permission. So there are certain websites out there that you simply cannot access unless you have a certificate on your browser or some other permission that allows you to use these to access these websites. Most websites are accessible. YouTube, Facebook, Amazon, these are fully accessible to everybody else, but some websites are restricted. So you need some form of digital permission which allows you to access these websites. There's numerous different ways that your permission can be interrupted. That is by, let's say you're using a work computer that's on a restricted intranet. Well, you can't access YouTube from an intranet-based web system, web server using from your work computer. So you would have to access that from your personal computer instead. That would be an example of one restriction. Your ISP might block your access to certain websites or certain modes of communication, but that doesn't generally happen. Generally, ISPs let communication flow freely. So on the subject of censorship, it's government entities primarily that are most involved with censorship. Government entities that can block access to websites and to other things that your internet connected device can access. If you think about this in the context of the metaphor, if the government were to block off your access to a website, that would essentially be the same as the government having law enforcement put a roadblock in the street that leads to that coffee house. So now you can't get to the coffee house because the government blocks your access to it. That's an example of censorship. So let's talk a little bit more about that and how it relates to our experience with the internet in the United States versus other countries. So you think about it, if you were at any point in time, if you wanted to get in your vehicle and drive across the United States, you would have the freedom to do so. Nobody would stop you. Nobody would prevent you. You could drive all the way from New York City to San Diego, and you would have absolutely no problems, other than maybe some tolls or something like that. But in the United States, you are allowed to do that. So if you think about it, comparing this to our metaphor about road travel and moving between the digital roads of the internet, censorship is basically a form of travel restriction. There are ethical forms of travel restriction. Let's say the government doesn't want you to have access to a dangerous location. They just had a massive fire, an active shooter, something of that nature. The government, boom, says, hey, you cannot cross this road. It's dangerous. You're not allowed to be here. And you'd be like, fine, no problem. I understand that. But let's say the government blocks your access to the coffee shop, and only the coffee shop. You might say, okay, that's fair enough, because after all, the government sometimes blocks access to websites normally. Websites that incite violence, that contain child porn, that have illegal content. That's also ethical and makes sense. But then imagine that the government is blocking your access to every single road in the city except for the government paid for library and city hall. Now you're talking about a form of roadblocks and restriction of movement that would seriously concern you. That is the nature of how censorship works in major countries like China, and in Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Burma, and other places like that. We may not think of it so much here in the United States, but in many of these countries, these forms of digital roadblocks are unbelievably oppressive. In North Korea, for instance, these digital roadblocks are so severe that only 4% of the entire population even has access to the internet. Here, you can take a $40 Android smartphone, go to your local Starbucks, and boom, you have internet access. In North Korea, only 4% have access to the internet. In places like China, Saudi Arabia, and Burma, these users have no online freedom, no ability to express their opinions or minds. Everything they do online is constantly scrutinized. They can't say anything negative about their government. They can't say anything negative about government actions, about events that happened in their country in the past. None of these things are allowed. They are swiftly dealt with immediate consequences. That is how it is in other countries. And that is their form of a digital roadblock and travel restriction. The issue with this type of censorship, if you think about it, is that in the United States we may look at something like that and consider it to be a problem. It's unfortunate. Yes, these people in our countries, they can't access the same websites we can, but what really is the big deal? They can still access the internet sometimes, and really it's just the internet. You may mess around online or whatever else, but how valuable is it really? I mean, it's just something that you use for online shopping and things like that, but does it really affect your life not having access to the internet? If you think about it, these authoritarian regimes, by restricting your online movements, by stopping that digital road trip, they are essentially locking citizens in their digital homes. In real terms, we would probably be outraged if the government restricted access to social media. We would be shocked and outraged, terrified maybe. But imagine what you would feel like if law enforcement came to your home and took your cars and said, no, you cannot drive anywhere. You are staying in your house and you will not leave. That is the physical version of what is happening digitally in countries that are oppressed by authoritarian regimes that universally apply these strict forms of online censorship. It is an ugly reality. That's why the United States declared internet access as a human right, according to Brookings EU. Because we humans, we should have the right to move. We should have the freedom to educate and express ourselves, to interact with people all over the world, all over every continent, every type of people, share our cultures and our creeds and our values. Online censorship prevents that. It prevents one of the greatest steps humanity has ever taken by making it impossible for people to freely share each other's ideas and to digitally go where physically they may be unable to do so. And that is what makes online censorship a form of tyranny. And that is why we should take it far more seriously than we do, and always demand accountability for countries that refuse to back down from censoring their populations. So thank you for watching my presentation. I appreciate everything, and have a great day. Thank you.